She and I met real quickly. Justin Baldoni's met her first at a club. She was dancing, salsa dancing, professional dancer. He then was like captivated by her person. They ended up talking. It wasn't a hit on. They went out to coffee. And then Justin basically, instead of saying, "Hey, what's your number? Let's hang out," it was more like, "Hey, I've got a group of people that are getting together talking about elevated concepts, spirituality, how to be better, how to serve humanity. There's a group of women that are talking about this kind of thing. Would you be, whoa,
Mm.
who are you?
Mhm.
Like, you're not trying to
Yeah,
like, what are you?"
yeah.
Then she started coming around, and then she and I met shortly after. I like to tell the story that she hit on me, but she didn't. That she cornered me and was like, "Please take me out, take me out, take me out." And I was like,
Please,
"No, no,
please.
that didn't happen." Fast forward, we're becoming friends. We're doing these exercises where you kind of like look in each other's eyes for like as long as you can without blinking, and like you're gonna
Mhm.
go whatever all that stuff. And we are partnered up to. And in that moment, she likes to say that she saw me fall in love with her.
For real. Hi, besties. It's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It took me a while when I was covering and I started covering the story of this lawsuit between Blake Lively and Wayfair Studios and these PR people. And it took me a while to go through the different claims that were made by Blake Lively. And as I went through the claims, each one of them seemed to fall apart after I was able to cross reference them to evidence. And some of the claims that she made were easy to find, other ones were more difficult. Justin released video of them dancing, which certainly helped and showed us a different view of how she described what happened. But the video you just saw is a story of how Jamie Heath met his wife Natasha. And Jamie was friends with and has been friends with Justin Baldoni for years, years. And they are both men that practice the Baha'i faith, and they are part of a Baha'i community. And they have had, this long-standing relationship. Jamie is now the CEO of Wayfair. He's a producer. He was the PGA producer of It Ends With Us. He recently was, served as an executive producer on Scarlett Johansson's new movie, Eleanor the Great. He was in Cannes when the film was released, and Wayfair was one of the film productions that put that film out. And one of the stories that was in Blake Lively's lawsuit was that when she met Justin and Jamie, she said that they described a conversation about how, Justin had met this woman, and then the woman was someone that he didn't want to date. And so then he passed her on to Jamie. Okay. And she made it seem like they were swapping ladies. Like she was describing this woman like almost as though in a derogatory term, like Jamie was getting Justin's sloppy seconds. And she was offended by this idea that these two guys, would share a woman. And then I found that clip, and it's describing how Jamie Heath met his wife, Natasha, and how Justin met her at a club. They went out dancing and they went out for coffee. Justin invited her to church, and Jamie met her when Natasha came to church. And Justin didn't date Natasha. They never dated. She was never his girlfriend, and there was no sloppy seconds. And Natasha and Jamie developed this relationship as they were going through their different exercises and getting to know each other through their faith. It's a really sweet story. And I'm not a spiritual person. I respect everybody's right to believe. And if this is the way that they'd like to live their life, I think have at it. But to frame such a sweet story in such a despicable way in a lawsuit, it made me really start to feel sad for all of these women that are about the a part of the story that are really being attacked in such a malicious way. That's my opinion. And I think a lot about Natasha Heath, and I think a lot about Emily Baldoni, who are the wives of Justin and Jamie, who, are living under this umbrella of and this cloud that their husbands were harassing this woman on set and being so inappropriate and making her so uncomfortable. It was so hostile. Yeah. So I think about what it would be like to be those women, knowing that that's not who their husband is. I also noticed that they mischaracterized stories about, Justin and how Justin worked through and talked about learning about consent as a young man and understanding, boundaries and lines and all of that, right? And he was very vulnerable and very open, and they used that story, Brian and Blake, to try to frame him as a predator, which is just simply not true. So, I'm confident after all of these months that I don't believe a word that comes out of Blake's mouth. I don't believe any of her claims. I believe they misconstrue everything. I believe they misinterpret things. It's my opinion that they twist narratives so that they can fit their own goals. And it was further driven home to me when I actually got a letter today for a cease and desist from Stephanie Jones when her attorney misunderstood and mischaracterized lawsuits of mine, telling me that I have a long history of being defamatory and harassing towards people, and that my goal is to damage businesses and reputations. And that's definitely not my goal. And then because I settled two lawsuits, one was dismissed in the state of Washington, and then there was private mediation afterward, after there was multiple people like my side and the other side saying they were going to sue, and then another case where one person sued me and then I sued them because they were doing things to me as well. And both cases settled with no liability found, no money exchanged. And she says the swift settlements of many of these matters are telling and reflect the indefensibility of your statements. Mischaracterizing what I've honestly and been very open about occurred. I have never, and I've always publicly stated that no money changed hands. There was nothing that was indefensible. There was nothing that there was no one that proved that I was defamatory or harassing of anyone. And then to also have that same person defend a man that's currently being accused in court in California of human trafficking. And when I saw what they could do to me, I thought, well, it's pretty simple, Sometimes people think that they can twist narratives, right? And so when I saw these amicus curiae coming out, I said what I thought and what I found, and I said, these seem like they're late. The appellate court says that they're supposed to be 7 days after they're filed, after a brief is filed. There isn't really a rule in the district court because there isn't a rule, because amicus curiae are not normal in the district court level. They're mostly used in Supreme Courts and appellate courts. And so my suspicion was that Brian Friedman and the crew were going to ask that the court either deny them or have them struck, and probably because they were late and irrelevant. And I got a lot of heat. Several people and different creators got kind of mad and said that I was giving wrong information. But Brian Friedman sent a letter to the court, and I just want to tell you how he wants to handle these briefs since we've been talking about them this week. He kind of matches and models what I told you all. And he did this in a very nice way because he didn't want to take away from what these organizations are doing. But non-parties equal rights advocates of California Employment Lawyers Association and the Women's Law Center for all filed for leave to file a brief of an amicus curiae in support of Blake Lively's motion to dismiss the amended complaint, which was fully briefed months ago. As described below, the court should deny the organization's motion for leave to file an untimely partisan amicus brief that merely serves as a vehicle to renew Blake Lively's public attacks against the Wayfair parties, repeat arguments previously made by Lively, and raise issues that are irrelevant to the pending motion to dismiss. While the Wayfair parties respect the three organizations seeking amici status, their brief fails to aid the court in its task at the pleading stage. If for any reason the court grants the organizations leave to file a brief, the Wayfair parties should be permitted to file a responsive brief. They said that the initial matter the organizations filed, their belated motion with Lively's consent almost 2 months after Lively's motion to dismiss, had been fully briefed, enabling Lively to resume an unwarranted attack on the Wayfair parties with inflammatory comments to the press. The motion serves more as a publicity stunt for Lively than a useful aid to the court at this pleading stage. And then they also put in a footnote here that Section IC of Your Honor's individual practices in civil cases does not include motions for leave to file an amicus brief as a motion type permissible by letter motion. Nonetheless, out of an abundance of caution, the Wayfair parties respond in kind and with the 2-day window for opposition. Regardless, the motion should be denied because neither it nor the proposed brief satisfies the limited conditions under which a district court may consider an amicus brief. The circumstances under which this brief is to be considered is to aid the court, and it's limited in how they can do this. So they should normally be allowed when a party is not represented competently or is not represented at all, and when the amici has an interest in some of the other case that may be affected by the decision in this present case. And where those circumstances do not exist, leave to file, it should be denied, especially where the counsel obviates the need for additional input. So what they're saying is that in this case, they're really only supposed to come into here if they can provide something different than what has already been stated by Blake's attorneys, or to aid someone that isn't represented or doesn't have an attorney and needs some help of the court, right? There is no inherent right to file an amicus curiae brief with the court, particularly where the applicant's only concern is the manner in which this court will interpret the law. And that's what they're asking, is the court to interpret a law a certain way. The organizations do not assert that live counsel is competent, nor do they identify any other case that may be affected by this court's decision on Lively's motion to dismiss. Rather, the organizations rely on their unique perspective as drafters and champions of California Assembly Bill 933, which is another way of saying that the organizations attempt to provide disguised, premature, and inappropriate expert testimony at the pleading stage. As observed in the Seventh Circuit, the majority of amicus curiae briefs are filed by allies of litigants and duplicate the arguments made in the litigants' briefs, in effect, merely extending the length of the litigant's brief. Such briefs like this should not be allowed. They are an abuse. Interesting. He's calling the filing of these an abusive method. And that's a way to signal to the court that filings done in this way are an abuse of the process of the system. And that's how it can get removed off the docket. It's very similar to what her attorneys said when it came to Brian Friedman responding to their letter about the subpoena and how they got it struck. So an amicus is to be a friend of the court, not a friend of the party. While the Wayfair parties respect the work of the organizations, they are not neutral friends of the court, but rather advocates of specific policy interests that align not only with Lively's defensive posture, but also her affirmative claims against the Wayfair parties. C. Jones versus Bakura, denying leave to partisan advocacy group to file amicus brief because its usefulness is diminished at the trial level due to its obvious partisanship. In addition to the proposed brief raises issues that are not presented by Lively. One of the biggest issues that these briefs were claiming was that discovery, that these cases need to be dismissed at the motion to dismiss level because people that are being sued and retaliated but with lawsuits, they want to avoid the discovery process, right? But Blake has already opened up discovery, and I think I mentioned that last week or earlier this week when they filed these, was that Blake is suing them, and so discovery is already open, and it's a moot point in Blake's case. They said the proposed brief focuses on the need to avoid abuses of discovery in sexual harassment cases, which is an issue that was not raised by Lively, who did not move for a stay of discovery, and in any event is not applicable to the dispute given Lively's pending affirmative claims. Discovery is well underway, and these arguments are inopposite. They're irrelevant to this case. So they're telling the court the reason that they should dismiss it is to, make it so that discovery is reduced. Again, they already have discovery going on. They say, finally, the proposed brief violates the timing guidelines used by district courts for such briefs, while the federal rules of civil procedure do not address the submissions of amicus briefs. District courts have looked for guidance to Rule 29 of the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure, which provides that an amicus brief and motion for leave must be filed no later than 7 days after the principal brief of the party being supported is filed. The organizations filed their proposed brief more than 2 months after the Lively filed her motion to dismiss, well beyond the window outlined in the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure. As the Wayfair parties would need time to respond to the proposed brief, a decision on Lively's motion to dismiss would be further delayed by its inclusion, weighing against granting leave. Since parties should have their dispute resolved without any unnecessary delay, where the filing of an amicus curiae brief would cause such a delay, it should not be accepted. For those foregoing reasons, and with all due respect to the prospective amici, the court should deny the motion. So, really, um, the way it's being framed is that these people have the right intentions, right? They're doing this for the reasons that they believe are, important to them. But the reasons they're doing this is to try to tell a judge how to interpret the law, which is not what you're supposed to do with these briefs. And it's also being done for Blake, right, in support of her claims, which is partisan, meaning they've picked a side and they're not actually being a friend of the court. They're being a friend of Blake because they're relitigating what's already in her motion to dismiss. And anytime you add something new to the docket, like we've been seeing, it's that anytime that you add something new to the docket, it delays everything further. So think of all of the different filings that have been made. There's, a motion to compel, two by Leslie Sloan. There's one by or there's a motion to quash a subpoena by Stephanie Jones related to the Edgeworth security, which is how Jen Abel's phone was forensically extracted, the data and the stuff. And then there are motions to dismiss for Leslie Sloan, Ryan Reynolds, Blake Lively. There are third party motions to dismiss for Stephanie Jones. There's third party complaints for Jen Abel. There's multiple motion to compels for Blake Lively that are still outstanding. And now you're going to add this. And there's two motions for sanctions. Two motions for sanctions. So all of these motions just further delay because all of these rulings have to be made before he rules on anything else. And so he has big decisions with the motions to dismiss. The rest of these discovery issues, many of them might not even get ruled on because by the time he gets to them, those issues might be resolved. But the way that these documents were framed, these amici, these people came in and they re-legitimized her claims against Baldoni and basically made it seem like Baldoni is this malicious, abusive sexual harasser that's darvoing her with a retaliatory lawsuit and telling the court that this is a retaliatory lawsuit, interfering in the process because she already made that argument herself. And Blake has extremely high powered, expensive attorneys. She certainly doesn't need help from some advocacy groups. And they're saying that she's doing this specifically to further abuse Wayfair in the press. And given that the judge has been very sensitive to what they're filing on the docket, I think it was a good move on their part without insulting the organizations that, listen, we don't need your help. We don't need to delay this any further. I've covered a lot of cases over the years, and this is the first case I've ever seen it in a before it goes to an appeals court. Now I know some people have mentioned that Amber Heard did this, and obviously that didn't help Amber because Amber lost. Well, I guess it was a split decision, right? Like he was found liable for like one thing and she was found liable for a bunch of things. They eventually ended up settling, but a bunch of groups came out and said that Amber was, the victim, and they still say that Amber's the victim, even though the court doesn't agree that she was the victim. Anyway, she seems to be matching the same playbook as Amber Heard, which those of you that followed the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case have noticed, and I did not follow that case, so I cannot say. So that's one aspect of what's been happening this week and how Wayfair has decided to respond. And then another detail that's been coming out was a report by Puck, which is a independent news outlet. There's one of the writers there actually has had issues with Stephanie Jones apparently in the past. And anyway, they're now reporting that Blake Brown, the beauty brand, apparently has had a 78% decrease in sales. Now, this was released when it came to her lawsuit, and they said internal sales projections, the sudden unexpected negative media campaign launched against Miss Lively depressed retail sales of Blake Brown by 56 to 78%. That's how she's going to try to get damages, is say that this press impacted her brand, which will be very difficult to pinpoint. But um, apparently, Puck, who apparently has an insider with Target, says that the line is not performing well at all. This is what Puck reported. Blake Brown released its first new product since last summer, a hair care body mist. Just as Lively is now being accused by Baldoni's legal team of trying to essentially blackmail Taylor Swift, perhaps the most beloved pop star of her generation, into providing Lively with public support or else risk the release of a decade's worth of private texts between the stars. As I previously reported, the supposed source of Friedman's claim is said to be none other than Scott Swift, Taylor's dad. Apparently, none of this has sat well with Swifties who stayed away from anything to do with Lively. A person close to Target told Puck that Blake Brown will do less than 15 million in total sales in 2025. Blake Brown is a non-conversation at Target. The person added it went from a $100 million brand to a $15 million brand. And apparently, Betty Boo's, which is still being sold on Carnival Cruises, is also being hurt. And their quote says, "It's ironic that one of Blake's dragons came back to bite her, just like in Game of Thrones," my source said. No one is supporting Blake over Taylor, including all of their mutual friends and all of Taylor's fans. You do not try and blackmail Taylor. So in this story, they're stating that the loss in her business has nothing to do with Baldoni, but rather the fact that Blake threatened Taylor and that Taylor's father, Scott Swift, was the one that came forward to Brian Friedman. And it's been widely reported that it was Scott Swift. And Wayfair has said that they received information. They withdrew the subpoenas. And neither Scott nor Taylor has denied any of these reports that they are the ones, or he was the one that came forward and shared the information about them threatening Taylor. And then Taylor, her response after that news came out was not to deny it, but instead to say through her sources that she wishes she never met her. She is getting rid of her for good. Like, Blake caused too many problems in her life. And then further reports of like all of the other friends, like Cara Delevingne and Sophie Turner and Gigi Hadid, all cutting ties with her too and being loyal to Taylor Swift because they say that they can't trust someone that would pull something like that on Taylor. I mean, could you? If you knew that you were like steps away from having dirt put out on you in the public, I think what the ironic part of this story to me, more than anything, is that these publicists, right, that are on the opposite side, so Leslie Sloan and Stephanie Jones, they are making these lawsuits and they're claiming they're being defamed and they're being harmed. But yet, Leslie and Stephanie, in the world of publicity, their job is putting out information about clients, right? They put stories and plant stories sometimes, and they speak to the media. And in the case that we're talking about, Stephanie is being accused of putting negative stories in the media about Blake that were not favorable to her, but Blake is not suing her, right? And on the other end, Leslie's being accused of planting stories about Justin. And then Melissa and Jen Abel are being accused of running an untraceable smear campaign because no one can actually point to any stories they planted, right? So they have to lump it into an untraceable smear campaign. Meanwhile, it was their private text messages that were leaked and their private information that was leaked. And Stephanie and Leslie's information was not leaked, right? So the question for me is like, if you're in the business of putting things into the media and you're in the business of publicity for your public figures, shouldn't you be then in the business of understanding that if you become part of the story, you need to have a thick skin, right? I mean, how many celebrities have been able to live under this veil where they were shielded by these PR agents that deflected stories and put in different narratives to try to change what we were hearing, right? The days of PR have changed so dramatically because of social media. And, it's just ironic to me that these agents are threatening to sue everyone for reporting the truth and threatening to sue the people that won't play their games, right? Like, if you don't wanna play the PR game and you don't wanna get a statement from these agents because you don't believe what the agents are telling you is the truth, what's the point of publishing a statement from somebody's agent if you know it's not gonna be the truth? Simply so you don't get sued? I mean, Blake is going to blame this fall in the sales not to her threatening Taylor. She's gonna say, "No, it's all because of Justin," which it would appear that the way that Puck is framing this is it has nothing to do with Justin. It has to do with what Blake did to Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift is really going to be the one that can ultimately dismantle this entire case. Because if your best friend doesn't stand by you, there's something wrong, seriously wrong in this story. So she's seeing more fallout, right? Her product lines are not doing well. Betty Buzz is not doing well. Betty Booze is not doing well. And now it's not because of Justin, the reporting is because it's because of Taylor. I don't know how she's gonna spin that, because that reporting actually will help Justin with his case against Blake, because it'll be like, "Well, I don't have anything to do with this. You're the one that did that, not me." I think for a long time, all of these people were they had PR teams that kept their secrets, and now it's no more. And then they sue people or threaten to sue people that won't cover for them, which is just a way of silencing and manipulating people, in my opinion. Anyway, so Blake is continuing her smear campaign against Justin. That's according to Brian Friedman. And he doesn't want those briefs to be allowed. And then when it comes to her hair care line, all of that is because of Taylor Swift. What are your thoughts? Tell me in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed, and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.